She walked into the cafe like she didn't carry the weight of broken homes on her back. But I knew better. She was the woman who rescued wives from pain most people couldn't even name. I'd seen her before, strong, focused, almost distant. So when she invited me for coffee, I didn't think twice. Maybe I was just curious. Maybe I admired her more than I was willing to admit. But the moment she looked at me, really looked, something inside me shifted. It wasn't just coffee. It wasn't just a conversation. The way her eyes lingered, the calm in her voice, the way she leaned in like she already knew my story, it felt personal. And suddenly, I wasn't sure who was rescuing who. The cafe smelled like cinnamon and fresh espresso, the kind that wraps around you and makes the air feel warmer than it really is. I arrived 10 minutes early, mostly because I didn't want to risk making her wait. I had seen her before, on a panel, in a group meeting, even on a few local news clips. Always calm, always in control, always helping women who were hanging on by a thread. I didn't know what she'd seen in me, or why she asked to meet. But I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. I chose a table in the corner, quiet and tucked away, where it felt like the world might forget about us. I stared at the entrance every time the bell above the door jingled, pretending to check my phone to hide how anxious I felt. Then she walked in, just like that, no spotlight, no fuss, just presence. She wore a simple coat, her hair loosely tied back. No makeup that I could tell, just clear skin and steady eyes. She scanned the room, saw me, and smiled. Not wide, not fake. Just enough to say, "I'm glad you came." She sat down across from me, set her purse gently beside her, and folded her hands on the table. "Hope I didn't keep you waiting," she said softly, already reading my nerves. I shook my head, maybe a little too fast, and laughed like I was trying to make the silence less awkward. She asked how my day was going. "Normal stuff," I answered, but I could feel myself rehearsing in real time, editing my thoughts before they came out. There was something about the way she looked at me, like she wasn't just listening, but observing. Studying the corners of my words, the way someone who deals in broken truths learns to read people. She wasn't just hearing what I said. She was watching what I wasn't saying. Her eyes didn't flinch, but they didn't stare either. They scanned slowly, held contact just long enough, then drifted off like she didn't want to make me uncomfortable. But still, it felt like something else was going on underneath. She asked if I came here often. I told her no, not really. She smiled and said she loved the quietness of the place, how it felt like a break from the rest of the world. I nodded, but honestly, I was trying to keep my hands from shaking. I could feel it in my chest. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was more like a strange alertness, like something important was about to happen and I didn't know what yet. She leaned back a little in her chair, looked around, then back at me. "I've seen you before," she said. "You're quiet, but I notice things too." I didn't know how to respond to that. Was it a compliment? A warning? A sign? My mind scrambled, but my face just gave a small smile like I'd been caught doing something innocent. When the waiter came by, she ordered a black coffee. I asked for the same, even though I don't usually drink it that way. She thanked him by name, and I realized she must come here often enough to know the staff. Another reminder that I was stepping into her world, not the other way around. The coffee arrived, and for a few seconds, we both just sat there sipping in silence. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't calm either, the kind of silence where a lot is happening beneath the surface. Her eyes drifted to my hands, then met mine again. I couldn't tell if it was intentional, or if I was imagining it. But I knew what it felt like. It felt like being seen. Not just as a person sitting across the table, but as someone she was trying to understand. Something in her posture, in the way her fingers circled her mug slowly, made it feel like this wasn't just small talk. Like she'd invited me here with a purpose, and I hadn't figured out what that purpose was yet. My heart kept beating harder than it should have been, like it was waiting for something I didn't have a name for. She spoke like someone who had told the same kind of story 100 times, but still felt it in her bones every single time. She started talking about a woman she helped earlier that week. Her voice was steady, but I could tell it took something from her to say the words. The woman had been hiding bruises under sweaters, pretending to trip over furniture. Classic signs, she said, but no less heartbreaking every time she saw them. She called me in the middle of the night, she said, eyes fixed on the table for a second before meeting mine. Her husband was drunk, yelling. She locked herself in the bathroom and whispered through the phone like she was trying not to breathe too loud. I didn't interrupt. I just listened. I watched how her fingers tightened around her coffee cup, how her jaw twitched slightly when she mentioned the man's name. She wasn't just telling a story. She was reliving it. I showed up 30 minutes later. Police wouldn't come without proof or visible injury. That's the game, she said with a bitter smile. So I parked down the street and walked in like I belonged there. I stared at her, stunned. Alone? I asked. She nodded slowly. He wasn't expecting company. She described the moment she stepped into that house. How the husband's voice dropped when he saw her. How the woman behind him trembled, eyes red from crying. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "She's coming with me." He laughed. Then he looked at me like I was nothing. Just another woman trying to do something she had no business doing. "What happened?" I whispered. Her eyes flicked to mine, soft but fierce. She walked out with me. I didn't flinch. That's the thing with men like him, they expect fear. If you don't give it to them, they freeze. There was a silence between us. A kind of awe. She sipped her coffee like it was just another story, just another day. But I felt something shift in my chest. I'd always known she was brave, but hearing it like that, hearing how calmly she faced down fear, that was something else. Something real. Then, out of nowhere, she looked at me and smiled. "You've got that same kind of fire, you know." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "You see things," she said. "Even when you try not to show it. You watch. You think. You feel more than you let on." I didn't know what to say. No one had ever said that to me. And the way she said it, it wasn't casual. It wasn't flirty either, but it wasn't just friendly. It landed somewhere in that space between understanding and something else I wasn't ready to name. She leaned back in her chair, the edge of her coat brushing against her side. The sunlight from the cafe window caught the side of her face just right. She looked peaceful, but her eyes, those eyes, still held that weight. Like she carried every woman she'd ever saved inside her. I found myself staring at her for a second too long. I looked away, hoping she didn't notice. But when I glanced back, she was already watching me. Not in a judging way. Not even curious. Just present. Fully, deeply present. "Does it ever get to you?" I asked. "Helping all these women, seeing all that pain. All the time," she said. "But not in the way people think. It's not the stories that hurt. It's the silence. The way no one talks about it. The way we pretend it's not happening next door." There was something in the way she said it that made me ache a little. Not just for the women she helped, but for her. For everything she carried and never showed. She looked down at her coffee, then back up at me. "That's why I wanted to meet you," she said. "Because you don't pretend, even when it's hard." My breath caught. I wasn't expecting that. My hands went cold, and suddenly the table between us felt both too small and too large at the same time. I nodded, but I didn't speak. I couldn't. Not yet. She had pulled something out of me with those words, something I wasn't sure I was ready to face. But I stayed seated, and I looked right back at her. Something was happening. I didn't know what exactly. But I could feel it. And I wasn't going anywhere. The cafe had grown quieter, or maybe I had stopped hearing the noise. My focus was narrowed in on her, the way she held herself, the rhythm in her words, and the small shift in her expression when I asked something that touched a nerve. She wasn't guarded, but she wasn't open either. She existed in this space in between, and somehow, she made it feel like the most honest place in the world. She told me how she takes care of herself after the hardest cases. "I have to," she said, brushing her thumb slowly along the rim of her mug. "Otherwise it all starts living inside me." She mentioned her routines, lighting candles at night, driving around the city until her thoughts feel lighter, journaling until the ache dulls a little. Sometimes she cries in the shower where no one can hear. Sometimes she doesn't sleep at all. There was no drama in her tone. No need for pity. She shared it like it was just part of the job. Part of being the kind of person who walks into fire to pull others out. I found myself telling her something I hadn't said out loud in years. A moment from my past. Not as dramatic, but still painful. A relationship I had tried to fix, even when it was draining me dry. The way I stayed silent to avoid being too much. How I shrank myself just to keep someone else comfortable. She listened without blinking, without looking away once. Her stillness made space for my words. Not many people had ever done that for me. When I finished, I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. She reached out then, not to touch, just to move her coffee aside. But the way her hand moved across the table, slow and deliberate, felt like a gesture of closeness. A silent thank you for trusting her. Or maybe it was her way of saying, I understand. You shouldn't have had to carry that alone, she said, and her voice was soft but certain. I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. Her words hit something deep. Not just the memory, but the part of me that still sometimes believed I wasn't worth being heard. She leaned forward a little, elbows on the table, her gaze settling on me again. You know, I see women like you all the time, she said. Strong, smart, but always doubting if they're allowed to feel what they feel. Her words weren't flattery, they weren't meant to make me blush. But they lingered in the air like smoke, like warmth I didn't know I needed. The silence between us shifted. It wasn't awkward anymore, it was full of something unspoken. I felt it in the way she tilted her head when she looked at me. In the pause between her sentences. In the way she seemed to notice every time I tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. She asked if I wanted another coffee. I nodded, grateful for something small to focus on. She stood up, her hand brushing the table. As she did, and for a brief second, I felt the space she left behind like a missing note in a song. I watched her at the counter, speaking to the barista with the same calm voice. She laughed at something he said, and I realized I'd never seen her laugh before. Not like that, not where it reached her eyes. She turned to glance back at me, and our eyes met. Just for a second, but something passed between us. Something quiet and curious and impossible to explain. When she returned and set the coffee in front of me, her fingers brushed mine. Not on purpose, but not entirely by accident either. Neither of us pulled away quickly. It was a brief touch, but it felt loud in my skin. She sat down again, her shoulders just slightly closer than before. We didn't talk for a minute. We just sipped our drinks, the silence stretching comfortably now, like a shared secret. I started to wonder what this was. Was it friendship? Was it more? Was it something in between that neither of us had the language for? I didn't have answers, but I knew I didn't want to leave. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The light outside had softened, casting golden lines across the wooden floor of the cafe. We'd been sitting for over an hour, yet time didn't feel real anymore. Everything beyond that table seemed muted, like the world had shrunk to just the two of us, 2 mugs, and a silence that felt safer than most conversations I'd ever had. She shifted in her seat, just slightly, and asked about the music playing overhead. It was something soft, jazzy, a song I didn't recognize. We started talking about music then, almost like we needed something lighter to balance the weight that had just passed between us. She told me about the songs she plays on long drives, mostly instrumentals. Words get in the way sometimes, she said with a small smile. Music without them feels like breathing. I told her I liked sad songs. The ones that feel like memories you've never actually lived. She nodded like she understood that more than she could say. We talked about books next. She loved nonfiction, memoirs mostly, stories that were real. She said fiction never quite captured the truth the way actual lives did. I told her I liked novels where the characters messed up a lot but still found their way home in the end. She said, maybe that's the same thing. It felt natural, effortless, but the tension underneath never really left. It wasn't uncomfortable, just quiet and electric. Every glance lingered a little too long. Every laugh came with a shared look, like we were both reading between the lines of our own sentences. At one point, she ran her fingers through her hair, tucking it behind her ear. The way she did it, without thinking, made my chest tighten a little. I caught myself watching, then looked away quickly, embarrassed. But when I looked back, she was already looking at me. Her eyes held something, not flirtation exactly, but curiosity, a question she wasn't saying out loud. Or maybe she was waiting for me to ask it first. I started to speak, then stopped. I didn't know what I was going to say, just that I needed to say something. She raised an eyebrow, gently, waiting. I paused, then tried again. I didn't expect today to feel like this. Like what? She asked, voice steady. Like, I don't know. I laughed quietly, like I walked into something that wasn't just coffee. She tilted her head, considering me. I didn't ask you here for just coffee, she said. Her voice wasn't teasing. It wasn't even heavy. It was simple, honest. I blinked. My stomach flipped a little. I waited for her to explain, to follow up, but she didn't. She just let it sit there between us. I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know what I was feeling. But I knew it was more than admiration, more than respect. Something in me was opening, quietly, carefully, like a door that hadn't been used in years. She leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands wrapped around her cup. I like your presence, she said. It's calm, but also strong. You remind me of someone who's been through things and still came out soft. That's what did it. Not the words, exactly, but the way she said them. Like she saw right through the parts one tried to protect. Like she wasn't afraid of the mess or the silence. I smiled. I couldn't help it. And when I looked at her again, something passed between us. Something unspoken, yet completely understood. Neither of us moved. Neither of us needed to. We just sat there, the space between us filled with warmth and all the things we didn't need to say out loud. The cafe had started to thin out. A couple of tables were empty now, and the soft murmur of conversation had faded to the occasional clink of a spoon or the quiet buzz of a phone. Outside, the light was dimming, slipping slowly into the kind of blue that only comes right before evening fully takes over. But we didn't move. Neither of us seemed in any rush to let the moment end. She shifted the conversation again, this time to the nights after her hardest rescues. She said there were times when she didn't speak to anyone for hours, when silence was the only thing that helped her feel normal again. Other nights, she'd drive for miles through the city with no destination, just letting the streetlights pass by like a rhythm that didn't ask anything of her. Sometimes she'd park near the lake, watch the water, and breathe until her chest stopped hurting. She talked about a woman she couldn't forget, a case from years ago. She didn't give names or details, just a memory that still stayed close. She said thank you, she whispered, and then she disappeared. No goodbye, no follow-up. Just gone. Her fingers traced small circles on her coffee cup. I always wonder where she ended up. If she's safe. If she remembers me. There was something raw in her voice. Something that trembled under the surface even though she kept it steady. I wanted to reach out, but I didn't. Not yet. So I offered words instead, quiet ones. She remembers. People never forget the person who showed up when nobody else did. She looked up at me then, and this time her eyes weren't calm. They were full, of grief, of hope, of something deeply human that made my throat tighten. Sometimes I wish someone would show up for me like that, she said. I wasn't sure she meant to say it out loud. It came out like a secret she didn't plan to share, like something that had been hiding in her for too long. I stared at her, heart racing. There was no good way to respond, not one that wouldn't sound rehearsed or fake. So I told the truth. I want to be that for you. The words just came. Simple, unpolished. They sat between us like something alive, something fragile. She didn't smile. She didn't say anything right away. But her shoulders softened, and she exhaled slowly, like she'd been holding her breath since the moment we sat down. The connection between us shifted again. This time, it felt more solid, like something had quietly been agreed upon without needing to be said out loud. She reached for her drink, took a slow sip, and then let her hand rest near mine on the table. Not touching, but close. Closer than before. Neither of us spoke for a few minutes. The world outside the window had turned dusky, headlights glowing on the street like soft stars. A couple passed by holding hands, their laughter floating in through the slightly open door. She glanced out at them, then back at me. "I don't let many people in," she said softly. "I know," I said. Her lips curved into a half smile, sad and warm all at once. "But I'm glad I invited you today." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about connection or attraction. This was about recognition. Two people who had learned how to survive their own quiet wars, sitting across from each other and seeing it, really seeing it, in someone else. She didn't need saving, but she wanted someone who could sit beside her, quietly, and not look away. And maybe, just maybe, I could be that person. The sky outside had slipped fully into twilight. The golden edges were gone, replaced by a deep, soft blue. Streetlights blinked on one by one, and the cafe glowed warmer in contrast, like a small safe pocket away from everything that waited outside. Neither of us had looked at the time. It didn't matter. The world had shrunk to this table, this coffee, this space between us that kept shifting in ways we didn't talk about but couldn't ignore. I found myself reaching for another piece of myself. A memory I hadn't meant to bring up. Something about the way she looked at me, open, steady, without judgment, made me want to give her pieces I usually kept hidden. I told her about my childhood. Not the whole thing, just a moment. A night when I stood outside my parents' bedroom door, listening to them fight, knowing I was too small to stop anything and too aware to pretend I didn't understand. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer any words like, "I'm sorry," or, "That must have been hard." She just listened, the way people listen when they've been there too. "It taught me how to stay quiet," I said. "How to stay out of the way. I got so good at reading moods that I forgot how to speak mine." Her hand moved toward mine again, and this time, she touched it. Gently, her fingers rested on mine like a quiet agreement, not asking for anything, just reminding me that she was still here. My breath caught a little, but I didn't pull away. I didn't want to. She looked down at our hands for a second, then back at me. "You don't have to stay quiet anymore," she said. Not with me. It wasn't a line. It wasn't something said for effect. It was simple and true. And it broke something in me. In a good way. I felt something shift between us again. Not in a dramatic way. Just a soft, subtle click, like the way a lock opens when someone finally finds the right key. We both leaned back a little, but our hands stayed where they were. It wasn't about flirtation anymore. It was about presence. About trust. She shared something next. Not about her job, not about another rescue or another case. This time, it was personal. She told me about her first heartbreak. About the woman she loved who left without saying goodbye. How she tried to be strong, to act like it didn't matter. But it did. For a long time, I asked if she ever found closure. She shook her head, smiling without humor. I don't think I was looking for closure. I think I just wanted to feel seen. I wanted to tell her I saw her now. All of her. The strength and the softness. The protector and the woman underneath it all. But I didn't have the words. So I held her hand a little tighter instead. Outside, someone walked by with a dog, its leash jingling softly. The world kept moving, but inside, it felt like everything had slowed down. The space between us didn't feel confusing anymore. It felt honest, like two people who didn't need to rush, who weren't trying to name what this was yet. Just two people sitting still in something that felt real. She looked at me one more time and said, "I'm glad you came." And I whispered back, "Me too." The lights in the cafe were dimmer now, casting soft glows across the table as the outside world turned fully to night. Most of the seats around us were empty. The quiet hum of conversation had faded into background music and the occasional sound of dishes being stacked behind the counter. Still, neither of us made a move to leave. It was as if our bodies had decided that this moment wasn't finished yet. That there was still something left unsaid between us, even if we didn't know what it was. She rested her chin on her hand, looking out the window for a while. I followed her gaze. The street was empty except for a passing bus and a flickering neon sign across the road. Then she spoke, almost like she was continuing a thought we'd started earlier but never finished. People always think I'm fearless, she said. Like I go into these homes and drag women out because I'm some kind of hero. Her voice was low, not bitter, just tired. But they don't see what happens after. The nights I lie awake wondering if I said the right thing. If I missed something. If she'll really be okay. I didn't know what it felt like to carry that kind of responsibility, but I understood the feeling of wondering if you were enough for someone else's pain. I nodded slowly, letting her words settle between us. She continued, sometimes I think I help them because I don't know how to help myself. It gives me purpose. But it empties me. I reached for her hand again, no hesitation this time. I just held it, gently, because there was nothing else to say that wouldn't sound like trying too hard. She looked at me, really looked, and there was something different in her eyes now. Not strength, not calm, just truth. I don't let people see this side of me, she said. I don't let them get this close. I didn't expect to get this close, I admitted. She let out a small laugh, almost like a breath. Maybe that's why it happened. The silence after that wasn't awkward. It was full, but soft. We sat with it. Then she said something I didn't expect. You know what I think sometimes? I think rescuing wives is just one part of it. I think I need someone to remind me I'm not just the rescuer. That I'm a person too. I stared at her, feeling the weight of those words. They weren't said lightly. They weren't just thoughts. They were pieces of her heart she had kept hidden behind steady hands and calm smiles. And now they were in front of me, offered like something delicate but real. I see you, I said, quietly but firmly. Not the rescuer, just you. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if that sentence touched something she didn't expect to feel. When we finally stood to leave, it was slow. Neither of us wanted to break the moment. We stepped out into the night together. The air was cooler, and the city sounded distant, like everything had softened just for us. We walked side by side, not touching, but close enough that our arms almost brushed. Each step felt like a silent agreement to keep walking just a little longer. At the corner near the cafe, she stopped and turned toward me. Her face was half lit by the glow of a nearby streetlight, and her expression was unreadable at first, serious, thoughtful, maybe a little unsure. Thank you, she said. Not for listening, not just for today. For showing up the way you did. For being real. I smiled, heartful in ways I couldn't explain. Thank you for inviting me. She nodded, and for a moment, I thought maybe she'd reach for my hand again, maybe say something more. But instead, she just looked at me with that same deep stillness. The kind that stays with you even after you've walked away. And when we turned to head in separate directions, I realized something. Nothing had been decided, nothing had been defined, but something had started, and that was enough. It had been a few days since the coffee. Since that quiet walk under the streetlights where neither of us said what was lingering just behind our lips. I kept thinking about her, her steady voice, her eyes that didn't flinch, her hand brushing mine without fear. I didn't expect to feel this kind of weight in my chest, this warmth that came with remembering someone who barely touched me but somehow saw straight through. I didn't hear from her right away. I didn't reach out either. It didn't feel like silence. It felt like space, like something was settling inside both of us that didn't need to be rushed. I thought about the women she helped. About the strength it took to walk into other people's pain and still keep a part of yourself soft. I thought about the moment she said she needed someone to remind her she was more than the rescuer. That she was still a woman who could want, could hope, could be held. She texted me on a Thursday, just a few words. I've been thinking about you. That was all, but it didn't need to be more. We met again, not at the cafe this time. Just a walk in the park, nothing planned. No expectations. She wore a dark sweater and her hair was loose. There was no script between us, just simple words, quiet laughter, and pauses that didn't need to be filled. I looked at her differently that day. Not as the woman who saved others. Not as a story. Just as someone I wanted to keep walking beside. We didn't talk about feelings. We didn't label anything, but there was something different in the way our hands brushed. This time, she didn't pull away. This time, she linked her fingers with mine and didn't say a word. There were still parts of her I hadn't seen. Shadows she hadn't let anyone into. But the door had opened a little, and I could feel that she wasn't just letting me in out of curiosity. It was trust. Quiet, earned, and real. When we sat on a bench under the trees, she told me something I'll never forget. Most people think I'm strong because I walk into danger, she said. But being strong is letting someone stay when I'm not trying to be anything. I didn't need to say much in return. I just squeezed her hand. And she leaned her head lightly on my shoulder. There, in the middle of a park where no one cared who we were, we let the silence carry us. Not every story needs a dramatic ending. Sometimes it's just two people, finding each other slowly, carefully. Two people who've been strong in all the wrong ways and finally learned how to be soft in the right ones. Maybe there's no title for what this is yet. Maybe it will grow, or shift, or stay just like this, beautiful, slow, and quiet. But it's real, and sometimes, that's more than enough. If you felt something from this story, if it made you think about someone in your own life who saw you before you were ready to be seen, then maybe you know the kind of moment I'm talking about. Maybe you've been there, or maybe you will be. If you're still listening, thank you. And if you want to hear more stories like this, real, raw, and faceless, make sure to stay close. Subscribe, like, leave a comment. You never know who might read your words and feel a little less alone. Some stories don't end. They just begin, quietly, just like this. And just like that, something that started as a simple coffee turned into a quiet unfolding of two hearts. Both guarded, both scarred, but still willing to feel. Sometimes the most meaningful connections don't come from grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes, they're found in shared silences, honest glances, and the bravery of being soft with someone who sees you. Her strength wasn't just in saving others. It was in allowing herself to be known. And maybe mine was in staying, in listening, and in showing up without needing to fix or explain. What began with a conversation ended with a beginning, of trust, of tenderness, of whatever might come next. We didn't need to define it. We just needed to honor it. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it touched you, if it made you reflect on a moment you've had, or a moment you're still waiting for, share that with us in the comments. Every story matters, even the quiet ones. Don't forget to like the video if this meant something to you, and subscribe for more faceless stories that speak from the heart. Because somewhere out there, someone is living a story that sounds a lot like yours. And sometimes, all it takes is hearing it told aloud to feel a little less alone. Until next time, take care of your heart. And if someone sees it, really sees it, let them.